And we're live. Welcome to this very special DD Geopolitics live stream. My name is Jerry, and today it's my pleasure to introduce Dima from the Military Summary Channel. Dima, how are you today?
I'm fine, Jay. I'm fine, Jerry. Hello, my dear friends, and hello DD Geopolitical channel. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates that we're going to talk about Ukraine. So let's start.
Great. I wonder if we could kick things off. I'd love to hear about how you got started in the space and maybe what drove you to start the military summary channel.
You know that everything started in the 2013, 2014. Well, maybe you remember there was like a lot of events in Ukraine, in Kiev, on Maidan Square. There was a strike, a very big strike, the biggest one in the Sea region. And as a result of those events, the Ukrainians managed to make a military coup and to capture the power. After that situation, the ex-president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, became a president of Ukraine. And in the 2014, we got a lot of events like the Russians captured Crimea. They make like a plebiscite there, the referendum. The Russians also answered and moved their forces to in the direction of Donbass and so on. And those days, I was very young. It was like 10 years ago, probably. And there was a channel, Russian channel, website, Anna News, and they published like summary reports every single day. There was a man, probably he was a soldier, or he was a part of Donbass military forces who was trying to fight for DPR or something like this. And every single day, that man published his own like summaries about the situation. He was using the same maps like the Russian sources map, live UA map. No, he was using just the Russian sources map, and I was very impressed with his work. Maybe because he was not just a man like I am, because I don't have like a war experience. Maybe because he had experience, and not just had experience, he took part in those events. Probably he was fighting for the Donbass airport, or maybe he was fighting in Ilovaisk cauldron. Who knows? But his words, his way he represented the works shocked me. I was very impressed, and I really liked that. But few like months later, he disappeared. Maybe there's a very high chances that maybe he was killed during the actions in 2014 or something like that, and he disappeared. But I remember his style, I remember the work, how he did everything. And after that, there was a situation in Syria, and I got deeper into the mappings and so on. I followed the war in Syria like every single day. There was also a lot of reports, a lot of updates, because the Russians have their presence there, and there was a Wagner also in Syria. So there were also a lot of content. And in 2022, when everything started, when I remember that morning, I remember the my like line in TikTok, when every second video in TikTok was about the air bombings and missile strikes and so on. And everybody those days, and the beginning and the end of February, the beginning of the March, were doing just one thing. Everybody was trying to search as much as possible information, updates, and so on. And those days, and a year ago, more than a year, half a year ago, I realized that this is what I must do, because I know how to do. I have a lot of like not experience, but I have a lot of examples how to do it the best way. I had access to the Russian sources map, but because of sanctions, not everybody had that access, and just everything like calculated. And I start doing this. And furthermore, there was also a very interesting case like months before I started doing all these things. One man gave me as a present the microphone, my old microphone. It was a present. I didn't know how to use this. It just was, I believe that he gave me something that he didn't need. But in a month, this microphone become something that made me military summary, and made like all this content and so on. And that's the story.
That's great. I think you've done a brilliant service for humanity, and I know that's what you relayed about folks looking for information and looking for really good detailed maps. I know that's how I came across your channel myself, and I'm extremely grateful, as is our audience, for the great work that you're doing. I know today we're at about the 101st day of this greatest Ukrainian counteroffensive, as you like to call it. I'm just wondering if you could take us through the summer and give us some of the highlights, some of the key moments for you of this counteroffensive, and take us to where we are today in September.
Yes, of course. If you don't mind, could you share the screen and could you open the map?
Of course.
Yes, one of things, this is my map. Currently, you're not able to find this map in the internet, but I promise that very soon I'm going to go online and everybody will get access and will be able to see the combat lines, to see the videos and so on. And when talking about the Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation, of course, the operation stacked and the Ukrainians haven't managed to maybe they managed to get the first defense belt if we're talking about the as Bradley Square, Zaporozhye area, but yet we haven't received the 100% confirmation that Ukrainians controls Robotina. A few days ago, the Ukrainians have already published this update that they captured, but for example, today we got another video how the Russian BMP personal carrier was moving along the street, so that means that there is no 100% control. The Ukrainians still in this area, and we will remember probably this bridgehead for different things like this, like Bradley Square, because of significant number of armored vehicles of Western countries that were destroyed in this area. Also, we will remember this salient because of first two challengers or one challengers that were destroyed. When talking about the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, yes, the Ukrainians managed to capture a few settlements. They managed to force the Russians to step back. But when talking about the configuration, if we take a look at this map, we see that maybe at some point of view, at some angle, we can say that the Russians currently have a better position because they maintain the front line, they made the line more strict in comparison with the previous situation. Because if you remember, at the beginning of that attack, at that operation, the Russians, there was a small salient like this one, and it was very difficult to hold this foothold, to hold this territory. And as I understand from the beginning, the Russian military authorities understood that it was just a matter of time, not the question whether the Ukrainians are able to cut this salient. It was just the question when the Russians would leave this foothold and what price the Ukrainians would pay for this territory. And as we know, the Ukrainians paid significant price for this salient, not just for this salient, but for the entire greatest counter-offensive operation. Of course, the Ukrainians are not providing us the numbers, how many losses, how many soldiers they lost during those battles. The only thing how can we measure the Ukrainian situation is the things and updates or rumors or something else with the possible Ukrainian mobilization, because some sources are saying that Ukrainians are planning to mobilize another 500,000 soldiers from 500,000 soldiers during the next autumn and winter before the next summer. And because the Ukrainians will try to repeat the story, they will try to continue their offensive operation. And when talking about the Russians, very difficult to say the Russians' losses and whether their losses at all. But the president of Russia reported that during the previous days and during the Ukrainian clashes, they have already lost 71,000 soldiers. This is a significant number, and Putin can give us the number just, let's say, the losses on the combat line. So those losses that they were able to calculate as a result of like destroyed armored vehicles, that those losses that were captured on the video camera and geolocated, and there are a lot of losses. The number is very big when talking about the hospital losses, because a lot of people, a lot of Ukrainian soldiers died while being like hospitalized or something like this. And of course, the final battle, the final direction of Ukrainian counteroffensive operation is Bakhmut. The Ukrainians tried to return control over the settlement, but yet, when talking about this direction, since the beginning of the special military operation, the Ukrainians haven't managed to capture a single settlement. They haven't captured Klishevka. Some sources are saying, and the Ukrainians probably a week ago already announced about the taking of Klishevka, and other sources a week ago, at least the Ukrainian Twitter segment of Twitter reported that they captured Andreevka a week ago as well. But for example, today we got some video from the Ukrainian sources from probably tank brigade or some battalion that brigade of active clashes inside the settlement. On this video, we see how the Ukrainian grenade launcher attacked the Russian positions in the southeastern part of the settlement, which of course confirms that the Ukrainians don't have 100% over the settlement. Maybe they control 80, 90%, but not 100%. And there are still Russians there. The Russians save the presence, and I believe this is the question of reputation, not for the Russians, but for Shoigu. We remember the words of Prigozhin. He's a very powerful man. He used to be a very powerful man, and he has some strikes, if you remember, with the Minister of Defense Shoigu. And I believe it's a question of reputation for current Minister of Defense not to lose Klishevka, not to give the people and his enemies to blame him and to increase the role of Prigozhin in all this situation. So, and that's it. The Ukrainians haven't achieved the goals they tried, they wanted, and we'll see what is going to be next. And the next, as I understand, the Ukrainians want to save the level of support. They need to sign contracts. They need to get more weapon. They need to get more modern weapon. They need to have storm shadows. They need to have endless resource of storm shadows, of Scalp. They need to have endless resource of HARM missiles, of HIMARS missiles, because the only possible solution for the Ukrainians is to establish, at least at this stage of special military operation, until the Russians are able to find out what to do with this, is to establish long-range complete superiority. And this morning, the Ukrainians, for example, tried to show their superiority. And as you know, they attacked Crimea, they attacked the port, some service service buildings. And as a result of those strikes, there were a lot of explosions. And basically, the Ukrainians managed to damage one ship and one submarine. Probably this significant victory. And furthermore, there are two things that we can discuss about that attack. First of all, is that Ukrainians managed to damage ships, and this is very important when talking about the meetings between Kim Jong-un, the head of North Korea, and Vladimir Putin. And from the other side, we got another update from the United Kingdom that Sky News confirmed that attack was made with the usage of Storm Shadow missiles. From one side, we see that attack was made with this usage, but from another side, we understand that this operation was prepared by the United Kingdom, probably because their weapon was used in that operation, and we understand what kind of problems the situation can create for United Kingdom. But as I see, the authorities of United Kingdom, they don't care about anything. They're very, very how to say. They're not afraid of anything, as I see. At least they're not afraid of the Russians. And the Ukrainians need this weapon, but they managed to achieve some success in Crimea, yes, but they were forced to use 10 missiles. 10 very, very expensive missiles, and the result, of course, is very poor. They just managed to damage, not even destroy. Yes, the Russians will be forced to spend some time, but I believe that the Russians will get some lessons from this situation, like with Crimean Bridge, and they will improve their defense. And the Ukrainians, the next time, gonna need not 10 missiles, but maybe 20 or even more. And then the question whether the Western countries are able to provide the Ukrainians such a big number of missiles and long-range weapon for the Ukrainians. That's it about this situation.
So it seems to me that Ukraine is really pushing for media victories, let alone the fact that they haven't established anything meaningful apart from a few small villages over the past 101 days. I'm wondering, you mentioned some lessons learned for the Russians around Crimea with the Crimean Bridge. Have there been any standout tactics or strategies that the Russians have employed that have surprised you? And are there any more lessons learned that you think that the Russians are bringing to bear, as we kind of move past this Ukrainian offensive and we see what comes next?
Yes, you know that I wonder, and the biggest question for me, why the Russians sometimes that people can be split in two groups: those people who can learn some lessons on the problems and of other people's, and there is another group of people who can learn and develop themselves, just having their own problems and mistakes, right? The Russians are the part of population who can develop themselves and improve themselves just based on their own problems and their own mistakes. And for example, if you remember, during the summer, the Ukrainians made submarine, like Navy drone attack against the against Crimean bridge, and that bridge was destroyed for the second time. And only after the bridge was damaged and attacked by the Ukrainian Navy forces, the Russians took a decision to create some barrier in this area, and they sank few ships in this territory, and they tried to create something like this one. This is the barrier. So the question is, why haven't you created this barrier a year ago? Why haven't you created this barrier before the beginning of the special military operation? You knew exactly that Ukrainians would try to attack the bridge. Why did you create this barrier just after the Ukrainians destroyed the bridge for the second time? This is the biggest question I have. Probably the Russians need to focus on this. They need to find a solution how to learn and how to develop themselves, not based on the previous failures and previous mistakes. They need to make some speculations, some projections. They need to understand what is going to be next and so on. And this will help them to improve. Of course, thanks God, when talking about the Russians, for them, like for their improvement, I'm not taking like Ukraine or Russian side. Just thanks God for the Russians. At least they found a solution how to improve themselves based on their mistakes. It would be much worse situation if they didn't improve themselves and they continued doing the same mistake all the time. So this is the barrier, and but again, when talking even about the barrier, the sources are saying that the Russians built this barrier just from the southern part, from let's say the Black Sea, not from Azov Sea. And I ask myself, the Ukrainians do have a very powerful, rich, developed network of spies in the territory of Russian Federation. I believe that if Ukrainians wanted, I believe they would be able to create or to redeploy or bring some Navy drones to the territory of Russian Federation and to attack the bridge behind from Azov, from the Sea of Azov. We'll see what the Russians are going to do with this. When talking about other tactics, since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians have improved their offensive operation, and currently they're not attacking. They're no longer attacking the Ukrainians with like tank fist. Like they're not concentrating like more than 2 or 3 armored vehicles in one attack. When talk, this is not just this concerns not just the Russians, also the Ukrainians stopped using the like tactics of broad frontline attacks with armored vehicles. Using that tactics, the Ukrainians were completely defeated in Robotyne in June. They lost significant number of armored vehicles. And for example, the Minister of Defense, Shoigu and Putin, reported that during the just 3 previous months, the Ukrainians lost more than 6,000 armored vehicles. And it's more, the losses are bigger in comparison with the entire period of special military operation. Just for 3 months, the Ukrainians lost more than the period from the beginning till, let's say, the 4th of June. And just by the 3rd month of this attack, the Ukrainians took a decision to stretch their forces, to use a very small groups, 2 or 3 soldiers and so on. The question I have, what the parties, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, are planning and are going to do with the usage of probably the most important tactics of FPV drones. Because the current situation on the front line tells me that this is the future. I'm not saying about the future of 50 years, like in the 50 years or 20 years, but this war, this special military operation will be completed, and this side will win this war. Who wins this war? Who will improve and will create a very powerful production base of FPV drones? Who gonna have significant number of FPV drone operators? This is very important because currently we see almost every single day both sides, and the Ukrainians and the Russians, how they use. We are very familiar with two squads from the Russian side, at least the squad Babry. There operates in the vicinity in the area of Robotina and Sudoplatov, two very important, two very powerful drone squads. We know that the Ukrainians have like Madyar, the birds of Madyar, but I see that they are not developing this tactic massively. And the question I have, why is that? Why the Russians continue invest significant number of investments and money in development of tanks, forces, in development of missiles and rockets? Of course, missiles and rockets are very important, but they're very expensive. They're very expensive, and for example, this special military operation shown us that sometimes the Russians, at least in Syria, they were relying on Caliber, and they were attacking the bases of terrorists in Syria using Caliber missiles. And the Russians started this special military operation with the same type of weapon, but during that operation, they realized that it's too expensive. Sometimes it's too expensive to use one Caliber against one tank, and that's why they found a solution, and they asked their Iranian friends to share with them with these technologies of Shahid. And we see that the Ukrainians do have the same problems with Caliber missiles that are very expensive and with Shahid drones that are very cheap. They also have the same problems in air defense and so on. And the Russians have fixed this issue. They made this war a little bit cheaper, maybe not even a little bit, but a lot cheaper in comparison with the few first stages. When talking about the Western countries and Ukrainians, they still haven't fixed this issue. For them, for the Western countries, this war is still very expensive. The Western countries, the Ukrainians, continue attacking the Russians air defense for the Russian artillery systems with HIMARS missiles, and we discussed this many times that the Ukrainians using their HIMARS not very accurate. No, they're very accurate, but not very effective. It's too expensive. It's too expensive for just the regular and single like artillery systems like D-20, D-30 howitzers, like static howitzers that are very cheap, and the Russians can produce them thousands. The only question is to save the personnel, to save artillerymen and so on. And if the Ukrainians are able to fix this situation, maybe then it's gonna give them some benefits, and maybe it will make them a little bit closer to the victory. But yet the Ukrainians are too far from the from achievement of any goals and from the victory at all.
Yeah, I think with on the Russian side, you really see that military industrial production kicking up. You mentioned tanks and missiles, and certainly they have their Iranian friends and their North Korean friends. And I wonder, when I look at the needs
I,
by 2028 of monthly
Jerry,
artillery
sorry,
shells
sorry,
that the
sorry,
Ukraine so desperately
Jerry,
needs.
Jerry. One thing, I believe you was disconnected for a few seconds. Could you repeat the question one more time?
Okay, I was just saying that I think Russia, with their North Korean allies and Iranian friends, their military-industrial production certainly seems to be increasing. As you said, you mentioned increase in missiles and tanks, but the hope that that there can be an increase in drone production, which I think the Iranians can certainly help with, and Russia is certainly producing these geraniums now on their own. And when I look at the U.S. and NATO, with latest projections, even by 2028, that they won't be able to produce enough artillery shells for even on a month-by-month basis for Ukrainian needs. Um, I'm just wondering, as we approach the fall, what do you see as Russia's next steps? Do you see a looming Russian offensive? Are we looking at what are you seeing on the horizon for the Russians?
When talking about the possible next movements, it's very important to see the things that happened behind the scene. The first thing that is very important when talking about the Russians is their currency. We're talking about ruble, of course. Ruble, their main currency. And you know that every time the Russians started another military campaign, like in 2014 in Ukraine, in 2015 in Syria, in 2022 in when the Russians started their offensive operation, their special military operation, every time the currency exchange rate for the Russian rubles increased. So now let's say let's just like when talking about 2013 and 14, we're going like soft numbers just for as an example. For example, the currency exchange rate was 20 rubles per dollar, and when the situation in Crimea in 2014 and 20 and Donbass in 2014 happened, the currency exchange rate increased till, let's say, 35 rubles. So the difference is very big, right? Was very big. When talking about Syria, the Russians increased the currency exchange rate for another 20 rubles, so it was like 35 became 55. When talking about the beginning of the special military operation, during the first few months the currency exchange rate increased from probably 70 rubles till 100 rubles. Then it went back, but this is like an example. And every time the Russians can't print money. The Russians have oil, the Russians have gas, the Russians have like income in currency, in dollars, in euro, and every time they want to finance and invest money in war, they try to increase the currency exchange rate. So let's say you have a bill, because they're paying salary to the soldiers, to everybody in rubles. So if you have $1 billion with one currency exchange rate, it's one sum, one amount of money. But if you increase this like exchange rate, this is completely another amount of money. Sometimes it's twice more in comparison with the first situation. And this is the first like flag, the first sign that when we see some problems with the currency exchange rate in Russian economy, that means that they're trying to find resources, investments to make something big. And for example, this autumn, the Russian ruble fell down, much fell down, and more around 20%. So based on this situation, I assume that the Russians found money, and usually the Russians do this during the autumn and winter period of time, when the when you sell more gas and oil. And now we see that a lot of European countries continue buying gas and oil from Russia. The Russians have signed a lot of contracts. They found a solution how to sell oil and gas in the local currencies with a lot of countries. So basically, they have concentrated and accumulated significant number of money, and now they need to invest them. They can, of course, invest this money into the natural economy, but there is a war, there is a special military operation, and the Russians anyway found the pocket, found money to invest this money into this war. Very interesting situation with mobilization. If you ask my opinion, I expect that the Russians would announce the mobilization. At least during this autumn, they have already adopted a lot of like things, a lot of laws about the mobilization regulation, about the penalties and so on. So when talking about the legal side of mobilization, the Russians have improved everything. They have learned a lot from the previous mobilization, and I believe that they will try to avoid all these mistakes in the future. So now two things. First, the Russians have already found money for the next like military campaign. The Russians have already fixed the issues with the legal side of mobilization. Now the only thing the Russians don't have is the event. They don't have a trigger. You can't like start mobilization without something, without event, without a trigger. The last year, the Russian retreat and withdraw their position from Kharkiv area was a very powerful trigger, not for the Russians, but mainly for the Russian society. That was the first time when the Russians basically were defeated. Of course, I believe that in the future, in years, the science will understand whether that was a real like withdrawal or just was a part, a trigger for launching of the like partial mobilization. We will find out in years. But now the Russians need a trigger, and as soon as they get trigger, they will launch this mobilization. Possible what can be what can serve as uh, possible triggers, of course, the Ukrainian mobilization. The Ukrainians are planning to mobilize up to 500,000 soldiers within the next year, within the next 8 months. But this is not like we can't use this event like a real trigger because it's a very long process that is stretched in time. Mm, when talking about the experience, we had the best trigger for the Russians to launch mobilizations is if they will be if they are defeated. This is like the best case. But currently, the Russians control the entire situation, and they're trying to focus not on the mobilization, but to sign contracts with people. And so maybe they're not going to launch mobilization because, according to the Russian authorities, they have already signed contracts with more than with around of from 200 till 400,000 soldiers, and this is very big numbers. These are very big numbers. If you ask my opinion whether the Russians are going to launch their own greatest counteroffensive operation, I think that the Russians are not going to attack anymore. The situation that currently that we can see in Ukraine is completely fit Russian interests. And furthermore, this is the Putin style. He's not he doesn't complete anything till the like logical end. Remember the situation in 2014 and 2013, 2014 when the Russians got Crimea, but they signed the Minsk agreements, but everybody understood that it was like a fake paper. Nobody was going to complete those agreements, and the Russians haven't completed that situation there. When talking about Syria, we see the same story. The Russians helped Syria; they helped them to probably defeat ISIS and so on. But yet we haven't seen that Syria established returned 100% control over their territory. And now we see the same situation in Ukraine, and the experience, in my opinion, that the Russians, there is a very high chances that the Russians are not going to counterattack or make offensive. Everything is okay for them. They're defeating the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have significant losses. The Western countries are losing Ukraine, and the people in Ukraine every single day more and more stop believing to the local authorities. The thing that Putin wants, he wants to elections. He wants elections in Russian Federation. He wants elections in United States of America, and of course, everybody wants elections in Ukraine. When talking about Russian and elections, we understand that Putin is going to win, and probably before his elections, to improve his own positions, he will try to show some results. And maybe for these purposes, he will make a small victory. I don't think that the Russians are going to attack along the current front line because they are well trenched by the Ukrainians. And no matter the Ukrainian reserves, the power, there is few kilometers in depth of defense, trenches, shelters, and so on. And if the Russians attacks the same way as the Ukrainians did, the Russians will have the same losses as the Ukrainians have or had. So the only possible solution for the Russians is to attack from Chernihiv or from Sumy, in those directions where there are no defense at all, or if there is some defense, this defense is in a very low development level. Maybe he will do this before the elections, but after the elections, he will stop one more time and to wait what his Western partners, as he liked to say, will do. For example, who is going to become president of the United States of America? Donald Trump or Joe Biden or someone else? What is the attitude of the Western countries to this situation? Very important question about the elections in Ukraine. Because if you ask my opinion, I'm not sure that population of Ukraine will choose Zelensky. Let's say if they make elections tomorrow, and another president can bring completely different situation. So not everything completely fits his needs. But the only thing, that question I have, why did Putin sign agreement with Kim Jong-un, the head of North Korea? We understand that the things that he needs is 152 millimeters rounds, and of course he needs missiles. So that means that from this perspective, we see some flags that that the Russians and Putin are planning to continue offensive operation, or maybe they need these types of weapon for defense. A lot of things, everything is very complicated. But one more time, something tells me that the Russians are not going to attack, at least like for some like purposes, like to establish full control over Ukraine, or for the purposes like to, I don't know, to capture another region or something like this. It's too difficult, too many losses, and this is not very good for Putin reputation before election period of time. uh, is Jerry here?
I don't know. I guess Jerry cut out for a second.
Okay.
We'll try to get him back. Uh, Let me ask you something. What do you think about the global implications of this war? Like, how do you see the latest BRICS expansion, or like the latest G20 summit? How the narrative has turned a little, you know?
That anyway, the most important thing in the world is, that I also faced with this problem the previous period of time, is to find a solution how to transfer money. This is one of the most important, the trustful currency and the way how you can transfer the money. And currently the Russians have problems with this transferring because they were cut off from the SWIFT, right? And not just the Russians, there is a very big list of countries who doesn't have access to the global finance, and who don't have possibility to transfer their money, to sell goods, to get profit, and so on. And this list is very big, and everybody understand that currently United States of America control, of course it's their right, it's their currency, dollar, it's SWIFT, belongs to the states entities and so on. And as I understand, the BRICS countries is a very big question for them to find a solution how to make payments, how to make secure payments, and not just like to be able to transfer money from Russia to Iran or from China to Iran. Very important to hide this information from the Western countries, from the United States authorities, finance authorities, and so on. So as I understand that maybe this is not the question of tomorrow, and this is not the objectives that can be achieved tomorrow, but anyway, some certain way of payment, like BRICS currency, is going to be created, obviously, and not maybe today, this year, but in 2 or 3 years, we're going to see something like this. And probably this is the most important, to have like independent currency for the BRICS countries, for Russia, for China, for India, for Iran, for South Africa, for Brazil, and so on. For Saudi Arabia, of course.
So we had Sarah join us. We'll see. She just finished the podcast with Elijah.
I want to know about Sebastopol. Have we already talked about that?
We have talked a little bit, but we can talk one more time.
Okay, dear friend, I want to talk about Sebastopol a little
Okay,
bit. I want to know what you think about. Okay, so we this weekend in crazy NATO stand, aka United States, we have been hearing about how Elon Musk has avoided World War III by not allowing them to bomb the Kerch Bridge. But I'm just confused because they're still successfully bombing Crimea with drones, water drones, aviation drones, uh, as well as storm shadows. So, what I just want to know how much further it's going to go in Crimea, or how much more do you think? I mean, we were supposed to have a beach party in Crimea in June. That didn't happen. So I'm wondering how much longer, like, this assault on Crimea is going to go.
You know that there is this war have at least few layers. Of course, the first layer is the ground layer, the situation that take place every single day in Rabotina, Donetsk, Avdiivka, and so on. The second layer of this war is the relations between very powerful people, the relations between Putin and Biden, the relations between Rishi Sunak and, let's say, also Putin, the relations between the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu, who is the second powerful person in Russia, and also with Mark Milley, the head of general staff, let's say, of United States of America. And these people can't, how to say, they need to be very careful with the words they use and their every single day. And a few months ago, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu, the second powerful person in Russia, told us that if Western countries would attack Crimea with storm shadows, and if they would attack Russia, and if they would get some success, then this is going to be another episode of the crossing of the red line. And as soon as Western countries do this, then the Russians will immediately attack the decision-making centers. And not just decision-making centers. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation told us that he makes some, I don't know, note that maybe we will attack not just decision-making centers, but also some NATO objects or something like this. So he was saying a very, very powerful words. And today, as you know, Sky News confirmed that it's like official United Kingdom news center hub, and sometimes they provide the legal point of view of the United Kingdom authorities, and they confirmed that that attack against the Russian ships in Crimea was made with the usage of Storm Shadow missiles. And furthermore, the Western countries were flying above the Black Sea with Global Hawk, with different types of reconnaissance aircrafts above the Black Sea, like showing the Russians that it's we who collected the information, it's we who provided this information for the Ukrainians, and it's we who supported the Ukrainians with the Western country, with the Western weapon, with Storm Shadows, and it's we who pushed the button. And what can you do with this? This is something like also an act of humiliation of the Minister of Defense, because currently he's in a very negative situation. From one side, he promised the Western countries if they do this, then there's going to be a very powerful counterattack, a very powerful act of revenge. And of course, we understand that to launch another massive attack against all over the entire Ukraine with Kalibr and Kinzhal missiles, with drones, is not the thing that people expect. People expect the real actions. And people sometimes expect something bigger, something that can show the Western countries who is the boss. And this is a very interesting situation. That attack was made by the Ukrainians. We will continue. There are going to be more attacks during autumn. Of course, everything depends on the Russian plans, if they're going to make their own counter-offensive operations. No, obviously, we understand that Ukrainians will not enter Crimea this year, maybe using some platoons within landing operations, as we saw during the August and September, but it's nothing in comparison with the real operations. And as I understand, now it's turn for the Russians to give a reply. So we'll see whether the Russians, to be more precise, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu, has balls or he doesn't have.
I think, Dima, you really hit it on the head there, that this isn't so much a fight, a war between Russia and Ukraine. Of course it is, but it's really Russia versus NATO and the Western countries, and primarily the United States. And, it's tragic. As we kind of come to a close here on this live stream, it's tragic that the U.S. is using Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian, and there's been hundreds of thousands that have died unnecessarily. It's absolutely tragic. I'm just wondering if you could give your thoughts on what you would, in the most optimistic way possible, what you would want to see as a resolution here. I always love how you finish all of your YouTube videos with, we strongly condemn any violence in the world. It started with Ukraine, and I noticed that you moved to violence anywhere in the world, and I think that's very touching. And it really humanizes the story for us.
You know that as I understand, this conflict doesn't have any ending, and it doesn't mean that this conflict is not going to be ended. There is no normal end for this conflict. There is no end of this conflict, and as I understand, either the Russians and the Western countries and the Ukrainians understand this. If the Russians stop the conflict, this war, without achieving their goals, and for most of the popularity of the Russians, the goals is to capture entire Ukraine and to start living as they used to live in the Soviet Union when we were all a big one family, like Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, and so on. If the Russians can't stop, they need to continue. They need to continue, or at least to keep everything as is. No war, no peace. The Ukrainians can't stop this conflict on the level right now, like to freeze the combat line, because as soon as they do this, people will start going home, and all the mass, all the things will come true. The number of losses, the number of people that disappeared, the number of people who were corrupted, those people who, for example, for $5,000 make people papers and they was able not to serve in the army. A lot of things that can ruin the country from inside. And the most important why the Ukrainians can't stop the conflict, because as soon as the Ukrainians stop the conflict, we will see the paper, the most important paper and document of the special military operation. And I'm talking the agreements that took place in February, March of 2022 between Russians and Ukrainians. There was a paper. Putin just once mentioned that paper, saying that there is nothing in this paper. The only things that we asked Ukrainians, according to that peace agreement, is not to be neutral country, not to join NATO, not to join European Union, and we are okay with this. And as soon as war finish on this level, let's say on this combat line, the Ukrainians will get this paper, because the Russians, sooner or later, the Russians will publish this paper. And if Ukrainians realize that on 2022, the Russians proposed them and suggested them to stop conflict, they will give them Kherson, Zaporozhye, everything. The only thing you need to promise not to become a part of NATO. The local population will destroy and kill entire current Ukrainian authorities. The Western countries can't stop this war without victory, because NATO will be destroyed automatically. Everybody in the world will understand that NATO is not something that can protect them from anything. uh, North Korea, Iran, China, they will start searching for some support in the, and not just the United States of America, but also in Russia with their weapon, and not just about these countries, Saudi Arabia and many other countries. The Western countries can't complete this war without victory. So that means, because everybody see their own victory as they see, we understand that there is no end for this conflict. And as one very interesting, very famous Russian blogger told, I don't know how long the Ukrainian war is going to be continue, but I know for sure that there are a lot of Ukrainians, that there are still a lot of Ukrainians will die during the next years. And we see that these words are coming true.
I love how you touched on the attempts that Russia made. I believe there were 3 attempts at peace with Russia through 2022. We had the peace negotiations in Belarus. We had peace negotiations with the former Israeli President Bennett and Prime Minister, sorry. And of course, we had, I think, the most promising agreement came out of the negotiations in Turkey. And
Yes.
I really agree with you that I think Ukrainians will learn of this, and it's not going to be pretty, and it's very tragic that the U.S. has used Ukraine to ruin Ukraine in an attempt to try to weaken and damage Russia. I just want to, I know, in respect of your time, I just want to wrap things up here and thank everyone. Thank you, Dima, for your time on this wonderful live stream. And just in closing, if there's any special projects that you're working on that you want people aware of, and of course, we'll provide all of your YouTube channel, your social platforms, we'll provide that in the description of this video after. Thank you again, Dima.
Thank you, guys. I would like to suggest people who watching us try to do all your best to save peaceful sky above your heads. You know that 5 years ago, probably the most important for me and for many of you, I believe, was like the money in your pocket, your health, maybe like how many cars you have, or flats or houses, and so on, what shoes you wear, and so on. But now this war, one more time, during the last 100 years, remind us that the most important in our life, not the shoes, not the cars, not the food you eat, nothing. The most important is the peaceful sky and possibilities to develop yourself, your family, your business, your relations with your friends. And this is the most important: peaceful sky. And you need, it's of course, sometimes you can't do anything with this. It's like society decide, like to have peaceful sky or to have war on your land. The Ukrainians in 2022 decided to have war on their land. So now we see, I believe that many of them have changed their minds. And if they were able, they would change their decisions and would turn everything back, no matter the Donbass, no matter anything.
Well,
Keep
Dima,
your sky.
I only got to talk to you for like 10 minutes, so that means that you'll have to come back.
Sorry, could you repeat?
I said I only got to talk to you for about 5 or 10 minutes, so that means that you'll have to come back.
Yes, of course, I will come back anytime. Just send me invitation. Because I expected that we will talk with people, some Q&A questions, but we are out of time. Next time we need to give people like to talk with people. I would like to speak with your audience.
I would love that.
Thank you so much, Dima, for your time, and we absolutely love what you do. We're all fans here. Thank you, Dima.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, DD Politics. Have a good day and a lot of subscribers.
Bye-bye.